Hi, my name is Brenda Bustillos. Today I will be talking about a philosophical problem. And in this case, we're talking about a question, which is there a self? Now, we will be talking about a few philosophers and their point of view regarding this concept, as well as a philosophy theory, which is Buddhist theory or Buddhism philosophy. We'll be talking about David Hume, John Locke, Thomas Aquinas, and then I want to introduce Hinduism and correlation with my point of view in regards to is there a self? Now, the first one would be Buddhism philosophy. And in Buddhism philosophy, there are five aggregates which all in all explain the belief that there is no such thing as a fixed self because our minds and our bodies are forever evolving, forever changing, and it is believed again in Buddhism that there's no self. Again, the five aggregates are form, volitional formations, perception, sensation, and consciousness, as you can see on that picture. Now here I want to talk a little bit more about the five aggregates because the form, it's pretty much the physical body. This, our little vehicle that we use to move around and do things with. Then we have um, sensation, and these are your senses. So your sight, your taste, your smell, and so on. Then you have perception, and this is the mind. This is the little focuses on specific characteristics that give us the idea or illusions of reality, of what is true, what is not true. And so with that, we then transition to volitional formations. And this is just um, um, your the way that your brain computes the thoughts and the intention behind your thoughts, which ends up molding and shaping our actions and in result our character, which is attached to ourself. Um, but because our thoughts are not the same as when we were children, that would fall within the there's no self in Buddhist philosophy. But then we move on to the last aggregate, which is consciousness. And consciousness um, is just pretty much talking about being aware of ourselves um, and our surroundings. There is a Buddhist teacher and author named Ahan Brahm, and he pretty much says that consciousness is the screen upon which all the sentient experiences are played out. In other words, this is a summary or a combination of the aftermath of being able to form thoughts, of being able to perceive, and experiences. Okay. And we're going to see later how, even though they have different reasonings, different theories as to why there's no self, they all have a common denominator at the end of the day. Now we're talking about David Hume, and David Hume was born in Edinburgh, Scotland, United Kingdom in 1711, passed away in 1776. He was a philosopher who primarily focused on empiricism philosophy, which later on he transitioned to skepticism. And when we're talking about empiricism, we are talking about sensory experiences, okay? Cognitive experiences, anything that has been built up over a course of actions that then you were able to experience physically, it'll become a memory. And in your memory, it's considered a cognitive action, right? And so that's what empiricism is it's pretty much a theory based off of experiences, lived in experiences. But David Hume moved on from that onto skepticism, and skepticism it's pretty much a constant state of wonder where you are constantly wondering, why is this? Why is that? Is this true? Is this false? Why is this? Why is this not? And so on. It's pretty similar to existentialism, but with skepticism, you're just kind of doubting. It's not necessarily a wondering that keeps on going. It's just you doubt it because you don't have the facts. Um, and so with David Hume, he believed that these perceptions were constantly changing and passing like a stream. In epistemology, he questioned common notions, of personal identity and argued that there is no permanent self that continues over time. And again, this matches what the Buddhist philosophy was talking about, that we're constantly changing. Um, and here we see how the brain has different gears and everything. It's constructing these different questions and theories, and that continues to evolve. Now we have John Locke. He was born in 1632, passed away in 1704, and he was empiricist. Okay, and with him, we are talking pretty much about, again, empiricism is sensory experiences, right? And he's pretty much saying that there is no real self because our self continues to change, and is very similar to, yet again, Buddhist philosophy and Hume's. However, I want to make a quick pause and talk about cognitive. And we were talking earlier about memory, and since we're talking about sensory experiences, the impact that they have on our physical brain, even though our bodies change, they grow, they age, and then they die, our brain, it's going to retain and keep accumulating these memories that are cognitive information. And here we can see how in the red we have what it's stored or worked, which is the intelligence, the judgment, and the behavior. And then we have on the green the memory. And on the red, that just so happened to be, that's where frontal lobe is. And at a certain point in our life, the frontal lobe connects, and we're able to make rational decisions that we weren't able to make when we were children or teenagers or even young adults. I mentioned this because David Hume, John Locke, and in Buddhist philosophy, they emphasize the constant changing and sensory experiences, yet we can see that this is information that it's stored in our physical brain that goes anywhere. This is why we have things like cognitive battles within ourselves, and we have to go to therapists because the way we were brought up when we were children is now not reflecting what we believe in, what we want to do, our parenting style. However, it's already been stored there because that's what has been inputted into our physical brain from birth up until we start able to make decisions and analyze things and decide what's good and what's evil. So now we move on to Thomas Aquinas, and he was another philosopher. He was born in Roccasecca, Kingdom of Sicily, which is now known as Italy. And he was born in 1225, passed away in 1274. And he was born from a noble family in Italy. He was sent to spend most of his childhood to learn about religion. because that was a decision his family made. However, once he was of age, he decided he wanted to discover and practice philosophy, and he was kidnapped by his own family. However, after a few months, they saw that him being kidnapped and kept away from society at their family home was just not going to work, so they let him go, and he continued to practice philosophy and his thoughts and his beliefs, and he focused on the balance between faith and reason, and quoted, "To one who has faith, no explanation is needed. To one without faith, no explanation is possible." Quote from Living Philosophy book, 4th edition, page 198 by Louis Vaughan. He believed in having a rational soul, but not becoming aware instantly. Instead, through cognitive learning and sensory experiences. Yet again, we hear sensory experiences, we hear cognitive learning, and he is saying that the rational soul is not something that happens instantly, and it matches perfectly with what I was saying previously, that what we are taught from birth all the way up until X years, it's called cognitive information, cognitive learnings. And so we are not born with a sense of self because we are being taught external beliefs, external information. But then there comes a point where our brain is developed enough to make our own decisions. And so we saw the previous image of the brain and the sections of the brain that manage different portions. Now, is there a self? That was the original question. And the answer is yes, there is a self, if you ask me. The ability to come up with questions regarding certain topics, like this one, um, determine whether something is good or evil, like the Peter Pan story or Peter, there is a children's story where there is this thief that steals from the rich to give to the poor because the rich do not tend to the poor. And so to some, stealing it's bad, period, point blank, but to some, in this case, it is good because he is taken from the bad people that do not share to people in need, and he actually does. If you ask me, that is good. To you, that might not be good. And I'm able to make this decision based on my experiences, things that I've lived and experienced, emotions that I have felt myself, not by things that my parents have previously tried and instructed me, regardless, right? And so, yes, I can have friends that I align with and that resonate with, but at the end of the day, I don't think the exact same way that they do, and they don't do that me. They don't feel the exact same way that I do. There are a lot of differences, even though we're so similar, and that goes to all of us as a society, which brings me to my new point. There are things that can't go forever as a debate. Ghosts, our ancestors answering our prayers, gods and deities. There's different stories and origins to all of these, and at the end of the day, it goes back to yes, we do have a self. Hinduism talks about death and rebirth, and all in all, it's talking about reincarnating so that you can pay karmic debts, so that you can live different experiences, different points of view, and experience really what good and is what is bad, and make changes. And this could not happen if there wasn't a self to go back to. My name is Brenda. Bustillos. Thank you.